Hello, students. Welcome to Pramati Hillview Academy digital class. Dear students, today I'm going to take up another beautiful and interesting chapter, Packing, from your Beehive textbook. Dear students, Packing is a story about three friends who are getting ready to go for a journey. Thus, packing summary will help students to understand this story in simplified form. It follows the packing session of three friends, Jerome, Harris, and George. Thus, it begins with them starting the most important thing of a journey, packing. This story is an extract taken from Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. I said I would pack. The writer Jerome liked to pack luggage for trips and announced that he would do the packing. I rather pride myself on my packing. Packing is one of those many things that I feel I know more about than any other person living. It surprises me myself sometimes how many such things there are. I impressed the fact upon George and Harris and told them that they had better leave the whole matter entirely to me. They fell into the suggestion with a readiness that had something uncanny about it. George spread himself over the easy chair, and Harris cocked his legs on the table. Jerome thought that his ability to pack luggage was better than others. He asked his friends, George and Harris, to leave the task of packing to him. The two friends agreed to his offer instantly, which was strange. George sat comfortably on the easy chair, and Harris bent his knees as he sat on the sofa and he kept his feet on the table. This was hardly what I intended. What I had meant, of course, was that I should boss the job, and that Harris and George should potter about under my directions. I pushing them aside every now and then with, oh, you, here, let me do it. There you are, simple enough. Really teaching them, as you might say. They're taking it in the way they did irritated me. There's nothing does irritate me more than seeing other people sitting about doing nothing when I'm working. By saying that, he would pack. The writer did not mean that his friends would sit and relax while he would do all the work. He had meant that he would boss upon them while they would do all other works. He would nag them and curse them for not knowing the work well. And then he would chip in to sort out the mess that they would create. He was irritated to see them sitting while he did all the work. I lived with a man once who used to make me mad that way. He would loll on the sofa and watch me doing things by the hour together. He said it did him real good to look on at me messing about. Now, I'm not like that. I can't sit still and see another man slaving and working. I want to get up and superintend and walk around with my hands in my pockets and tell him what to do. That's my energetic nature. I can't help it. He recollects that once he lived with a man who would sit lazily on the sofa all day through and would watch the writer do all the work. The man would say that he enjoyed watching him go around doing all the work. This would make the writer mad with anger. The writer adds that he could not sit idle and watch others work like slaves. On the other hand, he liked to check their work, walk around with his hands in his pockets, and direct them on how to do the work properly. He feels that he was energetic. It was a part of his nature to behave in that manner. However, I did not say anything, but started the packing. It seemed a longer job than I had thought it was going to be. But I got the bag finished at last, and I sat on it and strapped it. Aren't you going to put the boots in? Said Harris. And I looked round and found I had forgotten them. That's just like Harris. He couldn't have said a word until I had got the bag shut and strapped, of course. And George laughed. One of those irritating, senseless laughs of his. They do make me so wild. The writer did not say anything to his friends and started packing. As he closed it, Harris said that he had forgotten to pack the boots. The writer felt that Harris could have reminded him before he had closed the bag. But he thought that Harris was like that. This was followed by an irritating laughter by George, which made Joram wild with anger. I opened the bag and packed the boots in. And then, just as I was going to close it, a horrible idea occurred to me. Had I packed my toothbrush? I don't know how it is, but I never do know whether I have packed my toothbrush. Jerome opened the bag to keep the boots in it. As he was about to close it, he was struck by a strange thought that had he kept the toothbrush or not. He says that he never remembers if he has packed the toothbrush or not. My toothbrush is a thing that haunts me when I am traveling and makes my life a misery. I dream that I haven't packed it and wake up in a cold perspiration and get out of bed and hunt for it. And in the morning, I pack it before I have used it and have to unpack again to get it. And it is always the last thing I turn out of the bag. And then I repack and forget it. And I have to rush upstairs for it at the last moment and carry it to the railway station wrapped up in my pocket handkerchief. Jeremy adds that while traveling, he always messes up with carrying his toothbrush. He has nightmares of not having packed it, wakes up in sweat and looks for it. In the morning, he packs it before using it, then unpacks the bag to get the brush and uses it. As it is the last thing that comes out of the bag and he has repacked the bag, he forgets packing it again. At the last moment, he rushes to his room to get the brush. And finally, he wraps up in his handkerchief and carries to the railway station in his hand. Of course, I had to turn every mortal thing out now. And of course, I could not find it. I rummaged the things up in too much the same state that they must have been before the world was created. And when chaos reigned, of course, I found George's and Harris's 18 times over, but I couldn't find my own. I put the things back one by one and held everything up and shook it. Then I found it inside a boot. I repacked once more. As Jerome was looking for his toothbrush in his bag, he had to remove everything, but he could not find it. He created a mess. He found his friend's brushes many times, but could not find his brush. He kept everything back into the bag one by one, shaking each item, and finally found the brush inside the boot. Then once again he repacked the bag. When I had finished, George asked if the soap was in. I said I didn't care a hang whether the soap was in or whether it wasn't. And I slammed the bag shut and strapped it, and found that I had packed my spectacles in it and had to reopen it. I got shut up finally at 10:05 p.m. and then there remained the hampers to do. Harris said that we should be wanting to start in less than 12 hours' time and thought that he and George had better to do the rest. And I agreed and sat down. and they had a go. Now, when Jerome closed the bag, George asked if the soap was there inside it. As Jerome was impatient, he replied that he wasn't concerned if it was there or not. Closed the lid and strapped the bag. Then he realized that he had packed a spectacle in it too, and had to open it again and get them. Finally, the bag was closed at 10:05 p.m. Then they had to pack the food baskets. Harris said that as they were left in less than 12 hours to leave, they should pack the baskets as well. Harris decided that the food baskets would be packed by him and George. Jerome agreed to take his turn for some rest while his friends packed the baskets. They began in a light-hearted spirit, evidently intending to show me how to do it. I made no comment. I only waited. With the exception of George, Harris is the worst packer in this world. And I looked at the piles of plates and cups and kettles and bottles and jars and pies and stoves and cakes and tomatoes, etc., and felt that the thing would soon become exciting. George and Harris started packing the hampers in a happy mood. They wanted to show Jerome that they could pack well. Jerome waited for them to create a mess because he considered Harris to be the worst packer in the world. Jerome looked at the piles of plates, cups, kettles, and bottles, the jars, pies, cakes, and tomatoes which had to be packed into the hampers. He thought that as the boys would mess up, it would be an interesting thing to watch. It did. They started with breaking a cup. That was the first thing they did. They did just to show you what they could do and to get you interested. The scene became interesting as they broke a cup at the start. Jerome says that they broke the cup to indicate that they could do that too and to make things interesting. Then Harris packed the strawberry jam on top of a tomato and squashed it, and they had to pick out the tomato with a teaspoon. Harris placed the jar of strawberry jam on top of the tomatoes. The tomatoes were squeezed by the jar, and then they removed the damaged tomato with the help of a spoon. And then it was John's turn, and he trod on the butter. I didn't say anything, but I came over and sat on the edge of the table and watched them. It irritated them more than anything I could have said. I felt that. It made them nervous and excited, and they stepped on things and put things behind them, and then couldn't find them when they wanted them. And they packed the pies at the bottom and put everything on top and smashed the pies in. Next, George stepped on the butter. Jerome remained silent but sat on the edge of the table to watch the action. His silence irritated his friends. They became nervous and stepped on the things. They kept the things behind them, and later, when they wanted them, they couldn't find them. They placed the pies on the bottom and kept heavier things on them, which smashed the pies. They upset salt over everything, and as for the butter, I never saw two men do more with 1 and 2 pence worth of butter in my whole life than they did. After George had got it off his slipper, they tried to put it in the kettle. It wouldn't go in, and what was in wouldn't come out. They did scrape it out at last and put it down on a chair. And Harris sat on it, and it stuck to him. And they went looking for it all over the room. The boys overturned the can of salt on everything. Jerome says that they created a lot of confusion with a small piece of butter. He had not seen anyone create so much mess with the butter that was worth 1 and 2 pence. George removed it from his slipper and tried to put into the kettle. As he was unable to do that, he placed it on a chair. Harris sat on it. The butter stuck to him. He stood up and both the boys went around the room looking for the piece of butter. I'll take my oath I put it down on that chair, said George, staring at the empty seat. I saw you do it myself, not a minute ago, said Harris. George looked intently at the empty seat on which he had placed the butter a few minutes ago. He took an oath of truthfulness that he had placed it there not even a minute ago. Then they started round the room, again looking for it, and then they met again in the center and stared at one another. Once again, they searched it in the room. They met in the middle of the room, empty handed. Most extraordinary thing I ever heard of, said George. So mysterious, said Harris. Then George got round at the back of Harris and saw it. Why, here it is all the time, he exclaimed indignantly. George said that the disappearance of butter was the most amazing thing that he had known. Harris said that the disappearance of butter was a mystery. George saw the butter sticking to Harris' back and said that it had been there all this while. Where? Cried Harris, spinning round. Stand still, can't you? Roared George, flying after him, and they got it off and packed it in the teapot. Harris turned around and asked where it was. George flew to Harris's back and asked him to stand still. They removed the butter and packed it inside the teapot. Montmorency was in it all. Of course, Montmorency ambition in life is to get in the way and be sworn at. If you can squirm in anywhere very particularly is not wanted, and be a perfect nuisance, and make people mad, and have things thrown at his head, then he feels his day has not been wasted. Jerome's pet dog, Montmorency, participated in all this. His aim was to interrupt everyone and then get scolded for it. Jerome adds that if Montmorency was able to twist into a place and create nuisance by angering people and get things thrown at him in return, he felt that he had utilized the day in a good way. To get somebody to stumble over him and curse him steadily for an hour is his highest aim and object, and when he has succeeded in accomplishing this, his conceit becomes quite unbearable. Montmorency's aim was to get people trip over him and scold him. By doing this, he felt that he had fulfilled his aim and would feel proud of his achievement. He came and sat down on things just when they were wanted to be packed, and he labored under the fixed belief that whenever Harris or George reached out their hand for anything, it was his cold damp nose that they wanted. He put his leg into the jam and he worried the teaspoons and he pretended that the lemons were rats and got into the hamper and killed 3 of them before Harris could land him with the frying pan. Montmorency sat on the things to be packed. He thought that when George and Harris reached out for the things to be packed, they were reaching out for his cold wet nose and would bring it forward for them. He stepped into the jam bottle, he shook the teaspoons, he acted as if the lemons were rats and stepped into the hamper to kill these rats. He was stopped by Harris, who hit him with a frying pan. Harris said, I encouraged him. I did not encourage him. A dog like that doesn't want any encouragement. It's the natural, original sin that is born in him that makes him do things like that. Harris blamed Jerome for encouraging Montmorency for doing all this mischief. Jerome said that a dog like Montmorency did not need encouragement. It was born to be like that and act like that. The packing was done at 12:50 and Harry sat on the big hamper and said, "You hope nothing would be found broken." George said that if anything was broken, it was broken, which reflection seemed to comfort him. He also said he was ready for bed. We were all ready for bed. Alice was to sleep with us that night, and we went upstairs. At 12:50 they had packed the hampers. Alice sat on it and said that hopefully nothing would break in it. George was indifferent and said that if something broke, it would not matter. As they were ready for bed, they went upstairs to sleep. We tossed for beds, and Alice had to sleep with me. He said, "Do you prefer the inside or the outside, Jay?" I said, "I generally prefer to sleep inside a bed." Alice said it was odd. George said, "What time shall I wake you fellows?" Alice said, "7." I said, "No, 6, because I wanted to write some letters." As they settled in their beds, Harris asked Jerome if he preferred the inside or the outside of the bed. Jerome said that he preferred to sleep on the inside of the bed. This seemed strange to Harris. George asked them that he should wake them at what time. Harris said 7. Jerome wanted to wake up at 6 as he had to write some letters. Harris and I had a bit of a row over it, but at last split the difference and said 6:30. "Wake us at 6:30, George," we said. Harris and Jerome had a discussion on the time, and finally they settled on 6:30, each accommodating his time by half an hour. George made no answer, and we found on going over that he had been asleep for some time. So we placed the bath where he could tumble into it on getting out in the morning, and went to bed ourselves. George did not respond as he was asleep. Harris and George made mischief by placing the bathtub next to George's bed, so that he would fall into it as he wakes up, on the pretext that this way he must take a bath as soon as he gets up. Later, Harris and Jerome, laughing at George, went to bed. Dear students, I hope you all have enjoyed and understood this chapter, packing. But let me tell you one thing, students. Packing chapter is based on the theme that routine tasks are not as easy as they seem to be. The humorous account amuses the readers with the confusing situations created by the clumsiness of three friends, all of whom consider packing to be child's play. Dear students, I'll come up with another chapter. Until then, bye, take care.